because somebody else's moment was hijacked. When you woke up in the morning, when all of us woke up in the morning, the story was not how great Versus was. The story was not, ooh, that was a Versus for the history books. The story was not, Versus was so good. The story is Tamar Braxton, Cash Money No Limit Versus. That, I think that did a disservice to the whole thing. Hijacked somebody else's, and I'm not implying that it was intentional. Somebody else's moment was hijacked. The next morning, none of the stories related to Versus should have had anything to do with the Tamar Braxton.
When the internet woke up this morning, it wasn't music that was trending. It wasn't a tour announcement. It wasn't nostalgia or celebration. It was shock. Pure, stomach-dropping shock. Because two names that were never supposed to collide like this suddenly exploded into the same headline. And once people saw it, there was no unseeing it. Birdman, Tamar Braxton. One blurry clip, one whispered allegedly. And suddenly, the entire timeline was screaming the same question. How did this happen? And who just got humiliated in the process? But just as the internet was still trying to process that bombshell, another moment detonated without warning. A microphone. A laugh. A few words that landed like a slap heard around the industry. DaBrat didn't just speak, she exposed. And the person standing directly in the line of fire was Toni Braxton. Not in private, not off camera, publicly, casually, in a way that felt less like commentary and more like a deliberate undercut. That's when this stopped being messy gossip and started feeling intentional. Because when you connect the dots, the timing is too perfect to ignore. Tamar's name tied to a man deeply embedded in Toni's past. Toni suddenly framed as passive, embarrassed, spoken about instead of spoken with. And no one rushing to shut it down. No denials. No cleanup. Just silence while the internet did what it does best. Assume the worst, so now the question isn't what went viral. The question is who this humiliation was really meant for, and whether this was coincidence or a calculated public takedown hiding in plain sight. The moment the alleged sighting surfaced. The internet didn't wait for facts. It never does. Screenshots multiplied. Blurry angles were slowed down frame by frame. An anonymous caption suddenly spoke with confidence they didn't earn. Birdman's presence alone carries weight, history, and unfinished business. So when Tamar Braxton's name drifted anywhere near that orbit, people didn't ask if it was true. They asked why it was allowed to look true. That distinction matters because in celebrity culture, appearance is power, okay? And power doesn't move randomly. Within hours, timelines were no longer debating music or legacy. They were dissecting symbolism. Birdman isn't just a man in a room. He's a reminder of leverage, of control, of a past that still aches in public memory. Tamar isn't just a sister. She's the sibling whose pain, ambition, and defiance have always been read louder than her intentions. Put those two names together and the reaction was automatic. People saw imbalance. They saw provocation. They saw a situation that could only end in someone being embarrassed. What made it worse was the silence. No quick laugh it off. No y'all reaching. No denial tucked into a comment section. Silence let the rumor harden. And once a rumor hardens, it becomes narrative. Fans began arguing not about what happened, but about loyalty. Would Tamar ever put herself in a position that forces Toni to relive old wounds? Or was Tamar once again being dragged into a story she didn't write but couldn't escape? That tension split audiences instantly. And division is gasoline for VIRLITY. Then DaBrat spoke, and the entire atmosphere shifted. Up until that moment, everything lived in implication. Optics, interpretation, guesswork. But when her comments hit the air, viewers felt the temperature change. Tone matters, and this tone didn't sound protective. It sounded dismissive. The laughter wasn't light. It lingered. And Toni Braxton, a woman known for restraint and privacy, was suddenly the subject of a conversation she didn't consent to join. That's where embarrassment creeps in, not through insult, but through exposure. Clips spread faster than context ever could. People replayed the moment not to understand it, but to feel it. The internet decided it felt wrong. They heard a power imbalance in the way Toni was discussed, as if her emotional history was just industry chatter. Fans weren't offended on her behalf because of the words alone. They were offended because of who held the microphone and who didn't. Humiliation doesn't need cruelty. It only needs an audience. Timing turned discomfort into outrage. Tamar's name was already trending. Birdman's shadow was already looming. DaBrat's comments landed right in the middle of that chaos, making it feel coordinated even if it wasn't. Suddenly, Toni appeared surrounded, symbolically and verbally. People began asking why no one stepped in, why no one redirected the conversation, why it felt like Toni was being talked over while others benefited from the distraction. Industry watchers noticed something else. DaBrat isn't careless. She understands optics, which made the moment feel heavier, sharper. When clarification didn't come immediately, interpretation solidified. In modern media, delayed response reads as comfort, not confusion. And Toni's silence afterward, dignified as it was, only confirmed to many that the moment landed harder than it should have. To understand why this cut so deep, you have to understand the Braxton dynamic. Toni has always been framed as the pillar, the voice, the legacy. Tamar has always been framed as the challenger, the disruptor, the one demanding her own space. That contrast has fueled admiration and resentment for years. Every public moment between them is filtered through that history. So, when Tamar's name floated near Birdman and Toni was publicly reframed by someone else, it didn't feel random. It felt like an old imbalance being reopened. Silence from both sisters spoke louder than statements ever could. No unity posts. No protective language. Fans read distance where they hoped for alignment. Questions piled up fast. Why didn't Tamar shut the optics down? Why didn't anyone defend Toni publicly? Why did it feel like she was left standing alone in a moment that required backup? Those questions didn't need answers to cause damage. They only needed repetition. Then the conversation turned colder. Who benefits from this? Because humiliation at this scale always redistributes power. Attention shifted. Narratives reset. Toni absorbed emotional weight while speculation swirled around Tamar and Birdman, pulling focus elsewhere. Silence protected some and isolated others. That imbalance made the situation feel strategic, even if no one planned it that way. Allowed chaos can be just as effective as created chaos. Birdman's name continued to act like gravity. His proximity, rumored or real, reactivated old dynamics without new confirmation. Speculation grew legs. People stopped caring about truth and started caring about implication. And implication is where leverage lives. No one corrected the story because correction didn't seem urgent to those least harmed by it. The lack of repair sealed it. No apologies, no reframing, just distance. And distance is a quiet form of humiliation because it leaves the affected person to carry the aftermath alone. By the time the clip slowed down, the damage had already settled. Toni's dignity was mistaken by some for defeat. Tamar's silence was read as either restraint or avoidance. DaBrat's moment became frozen in tone rather than intent. What lingered wasn't the rumor. It was the residue. Public embarrassment doesn't fade. It reshapes perception. Every future appearance gets filtered through this lens. And as the noise died down, one uncomfortable thought remained, hanging in the air, unanswered and heavy. If this much damage can happen without anyone claiming responsibility, what happens next when someone finally decides to speak? What happens? Next is where stories like this stop being loud and start being dangerous. Because once humiliation settles into memory, it no longer needs new clips to survive. It lives in assumptions, in side eyes during interviews, in the way questions are framed before answers are even given. For Toni Braxton, the damage wasn't just that her name trended for the wrong reason. It was that her silence began to be narrated by everyone else. Silence in this industry gets weaponized fast. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that calls were made and not returned, that conversations were attempted but stalled, that Toni's camp was furious, not explosive, but cold. Cold anger doesn't leak loudly, it leaks slowly. According to people close to the situation, the real shock wasn't what DaBrat said, but how many people didn't rush to clean it up. In a business built on relationships, that absence felt louder than any insult. Meanwhile, Tamar's name refused to stop circulating. Every old clip resurfaced. Every past disagreement with Toni was dragged back into the light and reframed as foreshadowing. Commentators started narrating intent into moments that were never meant to carry it. Tamar didn't post, didn't deny, didn't clarify, and that silence split opinion even harder. Some fans said she was protecting her peace. Others said peace doesn't look like letting your sister take hits alone. Then came the so-called leaks. Screenshots with no owners, voice notes with distorted audio, claims of private conversations where Tamar allegedly expressed frustration about always being positioned beneath Toni's shadow. None of it confirmed. All of it believable enough to spread. That's how fake leaks work. They don't need proof. They just need to fit the story people already think they know. One message in particular went viral for hours before disappearing. Allegedly sent from someone close to the family, it claimed Toni felt blindsided. Not by Birdman rumors, but by how comfortable others seemed letting the narrative breathe. The message ended with one sentence that set timelines on fire. It's not what was said, it's who didn't stop it, whether real or not. That line stuck because it captured exactly how the moment felt. DaBrat's camp noticed the backlash growing. But instead of an apology, there was defensiveness. People close to her hinted that her words were taken out of context, that audiences were projecting. But projection is just another word for perception, and perception is reality online. The more explanations floated without direct accountability, the angrier fans became. Clarification without remorse reads like dismissal. And dismissal fuels resentment. Celebrity reactions quietly poured gasoline on the situation. A few vague tweets about respect and knowing when to keep names out your mouth sent fans scrambling to interpret who they were aimed at. A repost here, an unfollow there. Suddenly, people were tracking digital body language like evidence in a trial. Every move was treated as a statement, even when no one said a word. And then Birdman re-entered the conversation without speaking. A photo surfaced of him at an industry function, smiling unbothered. That image did more damage than any interview could have. It suggested comfort, control, distance from the chaos he was allegedly connected to. Critics argued that this is how power works. You don't respond. You let others scramble while you remain untouched. That visual reignited anger toward Tamar, not because she created the rumor, but because people felt she was absorbing none of the fallout while Toni absorbed all of it. Fair or not, narratives don't care about fairness. They care about patterns. And the pattern people thought they saw was one sister being spoken about while the other stayed strategically quiet. According to insiders, Toni wasn't shocked by the rumors. She was shocked by the lack of defense. In private, she's said to have expressed disappointment more than anger. Disappointment cuts deeper because it assumes expectation. Expectation of loyalty, expectation of protection, expectation that certain lines don't get crossed publicly, no matter how messy things are behind closed doors. That disappointment reportedly led to distance. Distance in calls, distance in planning, distance in communication that once flowed easily. Fans sensed it immediately. The warmth disappeared. Joint appearances felt unlikely. And once the public senses fracture, it presses harder. Questions get sharper. Speculation gets crueler. Then came the moment that pushed this from messy to explosive. A second alleged audio clip began circulating late at night. Quieter, harder to verify, but devastating if believed. In it, A voice resembling someone from Tamar's inner circle allegedly suggested that controversy was unfortunate, but useful. That single word ignited outrage, because usefulness implies benefit. Benefit implies intention. Whether the audio was real didn't matter anymore. It aligned too perfectly with how the situation unfolded. Controversy distracted. Humiliation landed. Silence protected. Attention shifted. That alignment convinced many that this wasn't just chaos. It was a loud chaos. Toni's fans rallied harder. Hashtags calling for respect trended. Old interviews of Toni speaking about dignity resurfaced, reframed as warnings ignored. Support poured in, but support doesn't erase embarrassment. It only acknowledges it. An acknowledgement can sometimes deepen the wound by confirming it existed. Behind the scenes, industry figures reportedly urged reconciliation, not publicly, but quietly. Not because of family, but because brands get nervous around unresolved controversy. Deals hesitate, opportunities pause, and humiliation, once attached to a name, becomes a liability others would rather avoid. The most unsettling part of this story isn't what's been proven, it's what's been normalized. A sister publicly reframed, a rumor allowed to breathe, a commentary delivered without care, and no one stepping forward to say enough. That absence has consequences that stretch far beyond one viral cycle. As days passed, the conversation shifted again. People began asking not who was wrong, but who would speak first. Would Toni finally break her silence and reclaim the narrative? Would Tamar address the optics and draw a boundary? Would DaBrat issue a real apology instead of explanation? The anticipation grew heavier than the original scandal, because once humiliation has done its work, silence becomes a countdown. And the longer it lasts, the more explosive the break becomes. Insiders say tensions are high, that conversations are happening that the public doesn't see, that when this finally surfaces, it won't be gentle. The real danger now isn't the rumor, it's the reckoning. Because when someone who's been publicly embarrassed decides to speak, they don't just correct the story. They expose everything that allowed it to happen. And if that moment comes, it won't just rewrite this narrative. It will burn down every assumption built around it, leaving one question hanging in the air. Unanswered and terrifying for everyone involved. Who's about to lose control of the story next if you're still watching right now? Understand this clearly. You are witnessing a story that is still unfolding. And once the truth fully surfaces, there will be no rewinding it. Moments like this don't happen often, where silence is louder than statements, where humiliation moves in real time, and where power shifts help decide who gets protected and who gets exposed. And the people who catch it early are the ones who understand it deepest. This isn't just celebrity gossip. This is about loyalty tested in public, reputations reshaped without consent, and narratives being written by everyone except the people most affected. What happens next will not be quiet, and it will not be kind. Someone will eventually speak. Someone will correct the story. And when that happens, everything you think you understand right now could flip overnight. So if you don't want to be the person catching fragments after the dust settles, this is the moment to lock in. Like this video because it tells the algorithm this conversation matters. Comment because your voice becomes part of how this story is remembered. And subscribe because when the silence finally breaks, you will not want to hear it secondhand, filtered, or softened. Stories like this get rewritten fast. Clips disappear. Narratives change. Receipts surface and vanish. And the people who weren't paying attention end up confused while everyone else already knows what really went down. Don't be on the outside of that moment. Stay here. Stay locked in. Because when control shifts, it doesn't send a warning. It just happens. And when it does, you'll either be caught up or completely left behind.